the psychedelic tools allow us to go into our inner gold mine. And then when the tool wears off and the medicine wears off, we have weeks and months and years ahead to polish the gold that we took out of the mine.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Practical Shaman podcast. And as you know, I interview authors when I find them interesting or their new books are interesting. And I was really fortunate. Dr. Richard Miller, interviewed me a couple of years ago about my use of psychedelics. And so maybe that's why I was on the list to get an early copy of his new book called Psychedelic Medicine at the End of Life, which is a really timely subject because not only are we at the end of life, but we're at the end of an era. And he goes into that a little bit in the book about how eras are and how they end and how they come to a natural end and how they come to a forced end. But we're not really going to get into that so much today. But let me tell you about this amazing man. He's in his 60s. No, he's in his 80s, and what's really compelling about this conversation is that he's probably shamanic because he's had several near-death or death experiences in this lifetime, and as the practical shaman, those initiations are what calls us to our shamanism. But he's very intellectual as well. He's a clinical psychologist, author, broadcaster with over 64 years of clinical experience in mind-body health. As founder of the internationally recognized Cokenders alcohol and drug program and the creator of the nationally acclaimed health sanctuary at Wilbur Hot Springs, he has dedicated his life to enhancing well-being. And I really found that that's what this book was about. I was telling him when we hopped on that I had myself laughing out loud when I was looking at the protocol of one of his more recent near-death experiences. And I'm going to let him tell you. I don't want to steal his thunder, but welcome, Dr. Miller, to our talk. And I look forward to seeing where this conversation heads.
Well, thank you for that lovely introduction, Renee. It's great to be here again with you.
So this new book, it looks like you've been writing it for a long, long time, since maybe that first intersection with the Winnebago, could I say, maybe, or what do you say?
I think that book has been percolating since the late 1960s, when I first took lysergic acid, diethylamide, known as LSD, and went through what's called a ego death experience. And at the time that I took it, and the time I had that experience, I had read about an ego death experience, so it wasn't as terrifying as it might have been, but it was pretty scary. Until I then let go, because I had remembered what I read from my colleagues Leary and Alpert at Harvard and Metzner, and I let go, and I went through and out, and then I was into cosmic consciousness, and no longer dealing with ego. And of course, it's ego where fear resides. So there was no more fear. And what happened as a result of that experience, Renee, is I no longer feared death in my life. I came to accept death both as part of life and not necessarily the end of life. Up until the time I took that LSD experience, I always went under the assumption that death was like going to sleep without dreaming. You close your eyes, you go to sleep, you don't dream, and that's forever. When I had that experience, I started to open up the door to the possibility that there really is no such thing as death. That's just a word that human beings have made up. And that what really happens is we go through a transition to another way of being. Now, another way of looking at this, Renee, is to say, I'm not a human being, Richard Lewis Miller, with a spirit. I'm a spirit that is temporarily inhabiting this body that goes by the human name Richard Lewis Miller. But when this body wears out, or I have used as much of it as I want to or need, I will move on to another form of being. And that is what sustains me. And that is what, that belief and that feeling, it is what has sustained me, as you mentioned, when my motorcycle accident that you mentioned, the Winnebago. Yes, I was hit head on and literally run over and crushed by a Winnebago recreational vehicle. And it was a very large experience. And I can go into, yeah, that's an understatement, I guess. You're laughing. I can go into as much detail as you want, and you should lead me in how much detail you want here. What I can tell you is that I never got afraid, because only death could be before me, or this word called death, and I had already conquered my fear of death. In fact, my lack of fear of death is what I'm calling in another book that I'm writing, Psychedelic Medicine Adverse Effects. My fear of death is, to a certain extent, is an adverse effect of taking psychedelics. And the reason I say that, Renee, is because by conquering death, or what's called death, so fully, I became fearless. And it's not a good thing in this life to be fearless. It's a good thing to have a little fear at the right time. Mm-hmm. So a 51-year-old man who started motorcycling in his 40s should not have been out there motorcycling that day when I got struck by the Winnebago and run over. But because of my fearlessness, which I'm now naming as a possible adverse effect and should be looked at that way, I threw caution to the wind and did something which I now look back on as reckless. Now, a lot of good came from that, my being crushed, so I'm not going to make it negative, but it was a big learning experience. I mean, the good that came out of it was how I pulled myself off that highway, how I used my lifelong training in breathing to stabilize my body so that the shock didn't kill me, how I used abdominal breathing and visual imagery to relate to the medical doctors in the emergency room because I didn't have an advocate, and how I then talked my physician in the emergency room into surgery rather than amputation. These are all the sequelae, both of the adverse effect of being fearless, but also the positive of having so much confidence that I wasn't laying there on that table scared into not being able to serve as my own advocate and save my legs, which I did.
Which I thought was really, really profound, that in that, and I don't want to tell everyone the whole story because we really want you to buy the book. And that's the whole point of these, these author podcasts, is to get you excited enough to buy the book. And there's some really good stories in here, along with some really, really great information. So we're not going to delve too deep into that story, except for that one of the things that I did notice through all your experiences of death, because there was that one, there was the one with the LSD, there was the Winnebago, and then your most recent face-to-face encounter with, your heart issue and this little cancer scare, that you have tools. And I think that essentially, when I read through this is not only has some really great stories that takes you from tool to tool, but it's full of tools. And you mentioned it, that you had the breath work, you had the community. The community is a very big part of this, that these tools are the essence of what help people face their own mortality and face their future with purpose.
You're absolutely right, Renee. When I awoke in the intensive care unit after the first 15-and-a-half-hour surgery. 10 of my friends were in the room. You mentioned community. And one of them had the good sense to bring a couple of bottles of champagne. and we celebrated. Instead of all kinds of angst about the crash and how terrible and blah, blah, blah. No, we celebrated that I was still alive and that I was in that room and that I was with them. And I said to them, yes, I heard this morning that I'll be in a wheelchair for the rest of my life, but everybody in this room knows that that's not going to happen, that I will be getting out of the wheelchair and I will be running again because I was a marathon runner. And I said to the doctor that night, my first day in ICU, I said, I know you think I'm going to be in a wheelchair for the rest of my life, and I've heard it from the nurses as well. But I'm going to look you right in the eye and tell you that I'm going to complete at least one triathlon within the next 2 years, and I will be running on my legs.
Did it take you 2 years, or was it done sooner or longer? Or
it was about 1.25 years, and then 1 3/4 years. I did 2 triathlons, and I brought my daughter Sarana as a witness. She swam with me in the bay, she bicycled with me, and she ran with me right next to me as I ran with special crutches.
That's really amazing. I just watched on the airplane A Woman Who Loves the Sea, and she overcame all adversity too, to not only to be the fact that she was a woman who swam the channel. I don't even know if that's the right name of the movie, but it kind of reminds me of that story where tell me I can't and I'll show you that I will. And it seems like that's kind of how you led your life. But you had to make some sacrifices as well. One of the things that you talk about is where you left some of the academia behind in order to pursue what you knew was true.
Yes.
You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I got my dream job after I got my doctorate, and my dream job was teaching at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. They had the largest psychology department perhaps in the world. There were 200 psychologists there at the time in 1966. And I thought I was in heaven. And really, and then also, Michigan had what's called the trimester system, which means 4 months, 4 months, and 4 months. All my life, I had been on the semester system, 2 4.5-month semesters, and then the summer off. But with the trimester system, you got 4 months off in the summer. You worked 4 and 4 and 1 off. Wow. The first summer I had off in 1967, I moved into the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California. And it was there that my life changed dramatically, because I was introduced to LSD. And I, again, for the second time, this time it was Sandoz, the real McCoy. The first time was, that I mentioned earlier in the program, I ate 400 morning glory seeds that I read about in the back of Alpert Leary's book, The Tibetan Book of the Dead. It said, if you eat 400 morning glory seeds, heavenly blue or pearly gates, you'll have a full LSD experience. And I did. But the second time at Esalen was Sandoz, which was fantastic. And that just changed my worldview so much. And there was so much going on in the Bay Area of San Francisco and at Esalen in the late 60s in psychology that I took a leave of absence, which became a permanent resignation from Michigan. Even though it was my dream job, this was now a new dream life. So I taught for 1 year. I was on the faculty for 1 year at Stanford as a way of sort of sliding into California. And then I opened up a clinic in San Francisco. And as they say, the rest is history. So that was a major change in my life. I mean, I had never even been to California before. But I knew immediately it was the place for me, because when I got off the plane the first time on a Christmas break from Michigan to come out and study with Fritz Perls and Virginia Satir at Esalen, I got off the plane and walked around in San Francisco, and I knew I was in the right place, because more than any place I'd ever been in the world, there seemed to be the greatest acceptance of individual differences. I could feel it. You could walk down the street in San Francisco painted blue or green, and nobody cared. It was how you were as a person seemed to be most important rather than what you looked like. And me, that was very important because I was already hip to the terror of racial prejudice based on how you looked. And that's another whole story. So that's how I came to the Bay Area. That was that was the end of pretty much the end of my academic career. I've kept teaching privately, but no more there. I miss it sometimes. I miss it.
Well, somebody only has to look behind you to see all the books to know that really you're a scholar and you never really let that part of yourself go. But I think that somewhere along the line, you got the courage to be a person of your convictions. And I think that that in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and, you know, even into the 200s was a tricky time and a tricky thing to do, because so the world opened up in the 60s and then it seemed to like close back down till just, you know, recently, where people have started to talk about, you know, plant medicines again, or medicines as a form of treating PTSD, depression, anxiety, and such. And what I got from your book, without getting all in the politics of it, is that you believe that we had that information 50 years ago, and we kept it secret among our little secret societies until what brought it back out? What brought it back out 10 years ago, or you know, now that they're doing so many studies on it?
That's a great question, Renee. I'd like to think that I made a significant contribution to bringing it out when I was on a national public radio affiliate in the early 2000s, and I ran on my program, Mind, Body, Health, and Politics, the longest running series on psychedelic medicine that had ever been broadcast in the United States. And I reached out to scientists, the very few scientists all around the country who had pushed through and gotten permission to do some psychedelic medicine research. And I interviewed these people like Charlie Grove at UCLA, Rick Doblin at MAPS, Roland Griffiths. I was one of the first, if not the first, to give Roland Griffiths a platform for his work with psilocybin and depression at Johns Hopkins, which really opened up the whole renaissance, that one study. And I also early on interviewed Gabor Mate and Carl Hart at Columbia. And of course, Dennis McKenna, who wrote The Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss about his relationship with his brother Terence McKenna. I had all these people on my program, and the program picked up, and people, as you say, in small groups around the country started listening. And I think that was part of what kicked it off. The other thing that I'm sure kicked it off is everything having to do with substances that we humans take in goes in cycles, historical cycles. So, for example, in the late 1800s, people got wise to the fact that cocaine was dangerous. But earlier in the 1800s, people were using cocaine, and even doctors were using cocaine. And Sigmund Freud in the early 1900s mailed cocaine to his fiancée. It's well known because he thought it would be a great cure for depression. So cocaine then gets realized that it's dangerous because of the cardiovascular issues, causes paranoia. It has a lot of other adverse effects, and it goes out of vogue. And then people forget, and it comes back in. That's why in the late 1970s, early 80s, I started what became an internationally renowned program called Cokenders Alcohol and Drug Program, where I brought holistic health into chemical dependence treatment. I was the first to do that. But again, it was because we saw a small epidemic of cocaine in the 80s. Then we sort of wiped it out in the 80s. I don't know if it's coming back now or it's about to come back. I hear that it is, but now we've got this thing with fentanyl, so dangerous. So the same thing with psychedelics. You know, in the 50s, it was when late 40s, 50s is when Albert Hoffman was working, synthesized LSD. Then the 60s, there was all this great use. Then the government comes in and suppresses. I mean, this is one of the worst things our government. I mean, that's not a good sentence. No,
I'm staying clear.
I don't want to classify the suppression of psychedelic science with some of the other hideous things that our government has done, which are much worse. So that's why I corrected myself with that comment. That's not to say I'm not a patriot and I don't love my country, and I'm not extremely proud of the fact that we were the first group in thousands of years to overthrow a king, overthrow the Pope, and become a democracy and a republic. I am extremely proud of being in that tradition. After thousands of years of kings who could just flick a finger and have somebody's head cut off, what a disgusting way reprehensible way to live. So we did that, and I'm very proud of that. But I also know that nobody's perfect, no country's perfect, and our country has done some really hideous things. The three worst things we've done are what we did to Native Americans when we arrived, what we did to women all along, and what we did to people of color. Those are the three, in my opinion, major stains on the American character. And it's our responsibility as people who believe in democracy and republic to fix those stains, to wash those stains clean. And we're making headway. I can see it in my own time, Renee, because being 85 and a half, I remember as a boy in New York, as a college freshman at 16, a man was arrested and thrown in jail in Manhattan. His name was Ralph Gleason, because on the cover of his famous magazine, he had a black and a white hand shaking hands. And for that act, he went to jail. I could cry when I tell you that story. It hurts my heart and my soul. A man went to jail for that. So now, it's 60, 70 years later, you can see that there's progress. But the issue with progress is because our lifetimes in these bodies is about 100 years, 70, 60 to 100 years, progress seems very slow. But when you measure it in terms of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of years, we might be moving along at a very rapid pace and becoming something. And I'll be happy to share. I'd love to share my ideas on what we're becoming if you have time for it.
Sure. Why don't you tell us what you think we're becoming? And I have a question. Are these plant medicines, are these psychedelics instrumental in helping us shape who we're becoming?
The psychedelics are nothing more or less than tools, in the same way that aspirin is a tool, penicillin is a tool, surgery is a tool. These are tools to work on this physical body that we are inhabiting. Psychedelics are a tool for seeing and experiencing the world in new and different ways. It's like you go to a restaurant and every day they give you a menu, and you go there every day for years and or every week or every month, and you get a menu. And then one day you walk in and you get 15 pages. Oh, my word. All this to choose from. That's what psychedelics do. They open up the mind and the consciousness to different ways of seeing and different ways of feeling and different ways of experiencing. So they are tools for allowing us 15 pages of menu instead of 1 page of menu. Or another way I look at it, the psychedelic tools allow us to go into our inner gold mine while we are using the tool. And then when the tool wears off and the medicine wears off, we have weeks and months and years ahead to polish the gold that we took out of the mine on that special day when we took the medicine.
And we might not even know what that is. This past weekend, I was home visiting my family. And I thought back about 20 years ago when I thought they were from outer space and a whole different universe and, the whole thing. And, now it was an absolutely joy-filled weekend. When Mom didn't want something I was offering, I'm there like, okay, let's do it.
Right. Exactly.
And when my brother-in-law, was talking one way on politics and I was thinking another way, it was like, yeah, I can see your point, because they're, like you said, these tools have polished my ego to know that I don't know anything or that I don't know anything about what your vehicle and your experience, and that we can both live harmoniously together being so different.
What that story tells me, Renee, is that you have let go of judgment and you have embraced acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do that, life is easier.
It certainly is.
And when you throw in a little gratitude, it's even easier. Acceptance, lack of judgment, and gratitude go a long way.
Absolutely. And you talk about that. Well, at the end, we'll go back to where you think we're going. But just one thing about in here, you have some steps of dying. And one of the steps of dying, and even in all of your near-death experiences, was the idea first that I might be dying. So this acceptance of this limit on this life before we can find the limitlessness. Do you think that that's a natural phase of the experience, or did I get that wrong?
Acceptance of what is a major tool. It doesn't mean going along. It means there's a difference between going along and accepting. Accepting is looking at the room and the books on the wall and seeing them as they are. It doesn't necessarily mean I won't straighten them out at some point, but it means I let myself enjoy them as they are right now. Yes, I might enjoy them even more if they were orderly, because I have that in my ego that I like order, and so I try to create it. But acceptance is just looking and saying, what a lucky person I am to have a library. How fortunate I am to be surrounded with books, rather than, oh shit, there's another pile there I got to deal with, and when I still haven't gotten to that, and all the kvetching and the whining and all the complaining and, stuff that I'm sure I've done in the past. And that's what you did with your family. It wasn't, what a thing, I got to get Mom to eat this different way or whatever it was you were into. It's my mom and I love her, and whatever she is, that's how she is, right? And I'm glad she's still alive for me. What a nice thing, right? That's a good thing. And I'm glad she's with you too, Renee. It's a good thing you still have a mom.
I agree. Absolutely.
Sure. My mom just is on my dresser in a photograph.
Well, because she'd kind of probably be living on the other edge, Something you said earlier that really struck me, because this was something that I came to on my own, was that people don't die. They change the relationship changes. I lost my dad when I was 32 years old. And I realized, as much as I'd miss him and I'd love to have him see the successes that I'd had in my life and the person that I become after he's gone, I realized really early on that the relationship didn't go anywhere. It transposed itself into this other relationship that actually was really more functional when we got down to it, was more realistic, and could still get to me over the time when there was something that came up. Could you speak on that?
What was it like, you're grieving for your dad at 32? Do you recall?
Well, it was pretty significant because it was the first time in my life he had shown up. I was opening a restaurant, and he showed up financially. He showed up to call me every single day when I was building it. You know, he helped me buy the building, all of this. And then I had this big grand opening when my whole crazy family came, you know, dysfunctional as they were. And the very next day, as karma would have it, my father went home and had a massive stroke. So there was this, wow, you finally showed up for me and now you're abandoning me all over again. And then he lived a couple more years, but through that process, I got sober, you know, in those last 2 years of him, you know, having aphasia and all of that. And so when he died, I almost felt relieved for him that he didn't have to suffer anymore, because he wasn't able to do the things that he preferred to do. And I didn't grieve at that time because I was running a restaurant. I buried him. That night, I drove back to my restaurant foolishly and walked in the door, not understanding my capacity for grief. And then the very next day, this man came in and said, "Oh, I'm really sorry about your dad, but can we get on with planning my daughter's wedding?" And I sold my soul there. And so I've learned with death is that you never want to sell your soul out for your grief process, because when I took on taking care of his daughter's wedding, I let go of, I put my grief process on hold. And it showed up 20 years later with some ancestry DNA nonsense.
And do you feel now that you've grieved adequately, or do you have some more in you?
You know, as you say that, it's like, wow, is there more in there? You know,
it's always worth looking because there's nothing to lose, right?
Yeah, like, you know, I did some shamanic things where we actually brought back the spirit and had a conversation, and it was like, okay, so I really believe that even like in this last trip with my sister, we talked about like, yeah, let's have this dysfunctional family reunion, you know, later after, you know, that there's no one to hurt or anything like that, because we found out about siblings we didn't know about and stuff. I mean, there was betrayal that showed up 25 years later after he was dead. And so I had to, it's like, it doesn't just, anyone who thinks that they can put it to bed with the casket being put in the ground, it's kind of a fallacy. But that's why these processes you talk about our own conscious death, our own doing it in a way that's way more with integrity. And I've been fortunate because I've had 2 friends die. One who said, "I'm out of here," and she left that night. And the other one who said, "Renee, I'm done," and was gone in a week and a half. And so I know that there's better ways of dying than with a stroke.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Yeah.
He goes into a
psychologist. Excuse me?
I said he's a natural psychologist. Is there still more grief there?
Well, you know, you're a very lovely, straightforward, down-to-earth person, and you show your emotions on your face, which I think is a beautiful thing. And I could see some sadness in your eyes as we were talking about your father, unquestionably. And that's why.
Thank you for.
Of course.
Thank you.
Yes, we're in this together, Renee. Of course we are.
We certainly are.
And the story that you tell about him, I don't want to get like, you know, too fuzzy-wuzzy, but you talked about how he came through with the restaurant as if he hadn't come through at other times in your life. And what I thought of when you mentioned the stroke afterwards is that somehow his inner wisdom brought him to make this one big gesture to you before he was out.
Mm-hmm.
And he somehow mustered his way to do that. I had a similar feeling when my beautiful wife, Jolie's mother died, and we were with her in early December, and our birthday was later in December, and I had a funny feeling she was going to hold on until her birthday, and she did, and she died on her birthday. And that's sort of similar in terms of the story with your dad. It's like something inside said, I got to show this girl, this daughter, this woman, this person, that I really do love her. And I may have missed the boat, but I can do something now. And he did something big, not only with money, the way you tell it, more importantly, or equally importantly, with the phone calls to you.
Mm-hmm.
The phone calls, they stood out for me. He didn't just drop a check. He stayed in touch. And so you had that beautiful gift before he then went out in not such a cool way. I agree with you. A stroke is like, ugh.
Yeah, really. What a beautiful, yes, you read all of that correctly. And that's really how I did feel, was like, because I'm a spiritual person. Yes, that's how my dad showed up. That was the way that he could show up. And there must have been some little inkling in his mind to know that he wasn't going to be there much longer.
Yes.
Because otherwise we would have missed out on that experience altogether too.
That's right. And then your memory would be a completely different memory of him. It would be a memory of a guy that never showed up.
Right. Right.
Now we have a memory of, in the last moment he came through.
Yeah,
his last moment.
It's funny because he used to, on my birthday, give me checks, give me money, and I used to always rip him up and say, go to hell. Take your check and go to the grocery store or go to the store and buy me something that you think that I would like. I was like, I was really headstrong about all of this.
I understand. I was too. My mother would put a salami in with books and mail them to me in college, and I'd complain about it. I'd be embarrassed.
That's funny. So getting back to the book. So everyone, this is his new book. It's called Psychedelic Medicine at the End of Life, Dying Without Fear. And I think that would be both of our wishes for you, that, that you could die without fear, that you could have those tools he shares so freely in here about whether it's the medicines. And I also liked that 20, I don't know, there was 30 different things to assess how you feel around when you do plant medicine. And there was something else very important in here, and maybe it has to do with the cocaine treatment you did, was that psychedelics are not for everyone. Certain psychedelics may be for other people, but some addicts who are just looking for that next high might not find their hope in psychedelics until they get stabilized. Before now, iboga and some other things of having really good effects with fentanyl and opioid addiction. However, you have to it's not like he's not suggesting this is a free range thing. He actually talks about a system of what the support system you need and all of that you need. Was there anything that I missed there?
Yes, Renee. It's important for our listeners to know that these psychedelics are not therapy.
Mm-hmm.
They are tools to be used in therapy. There's a difference. See, what we're used to is like we take a pill, and the pill is the therapy. We got a headache, you take an aspirin, the headache is quieter, the pill did the work. You have an infection, you take penicillin, the pill does the work. This is a different kind of medicine. This is a medicine that's a tool that has to be used in conjunction with the verbal therapy or the inner work with your eyes closed. Mm-hmm. This isn't a medicine that works for you. And it can be dangerous when you use it as a medicine that works for you if you do not do it in correct and appropriate settings, including who's around you.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we're under the influence of these psychedelics, we are very vulnerable. We're vulnerable to what's coming in. That is why in big doses, psychedelic assisted therapy in big doses. We often use blindfolds on the client or patient so that they don't look around and get influenced by all the colors or all the things that they see, and they work on themselves inside. That's the critical work. And you want to have somebody with you when you do that inner work who is strong and experienced, because you're liable to meet a demon in there. Not everything we all have inside is beautiful and on the beach and sunny and rosy. Some of it is tragic and painful. And when that stuff jumps out, because a psychedelic medicine will open up a door of the mind that you have kept closed, sealed shut for years perhaps, and suddenly the psychedelic tool opens up the door, and you're faced with whatever the demon is, whether it's self-criticism, you got embarrassed in school when you were 3 or 5 years old, you got, bite my tongue, raped, assaulted, beaten, hideous things, they could all jump out. That's the time when you want a professional next to you so that you do therapy on those demons and come away healing them and conquering them and feeling a sense of mastery, that I no longer have to put this stuff in this compartment, and I no longer have to feel the pressure being pushed against that wall to open up that compartment, and I no longer have to fight that fight. I can open up my mind and go anywhere I want without fear. Because remember, Renee, when we close off walls inside our mind, there's an energy price. You don't put a wall in place without paying a little tuition for the price of the wall. And then you got a wall over here, and suppose you have a wall over there, and you got 3 or 4 walls that you can never go through. And when you know that, and you close your eyes and try to go to sleep, and one of those walls might start trying to open up a crack. And that gets scary. With the psychedelic medicines, it might open up 3 doors at once. Actually, that's a good thing, because you want to look at the demons and the tragic pain and the open wounds so you can heal them. But you have to do it in a circumstance that's healing. You don't want to be opening up those doors in a rock show with 30,000 people all around you screaming their heads off, and all of a sudden you're dealing with your inner demons. I don't think so. That doesn't sound like a good thing to me, right? But to do it in a place where somebody's going to help and help you heal, and then you can walk around in the world with so much less pressure from these boxes that have material that we don't want to look at, that's a blessing. The medicines are tools, but they are not the doctors. They are not the therapists. They're not the shaman or shawoman, as I say. They're not the shawoman. They are just medicines to help us.
I love that. I work for a treatment company that we have a neuro clinic, and we do ketamine assisted treatment, and we have what we call, and our therapist has coined it, integration therapy. So he has a protocol that he does, what he works with people step by step by step, through their 5 or 6 sessions of the ketamine. And it's really profound. With the right people, he's had such significant results. And with couples, he's had such significant results. And I think that that's the part that you're talking about, that we do have to remember that it's the tool, it's not the therapist. Right. And I love that. All right. So I want
to ask you something quickly political.
Okay.
Do you think there's merit in the concept of saying shawoman instead of shaman?
I'm between a rock and a hard place right now. Because of the things you said, of all of the misuse and abuse. So here I am, in my mid-60s here, and shamanism called me. I might have gone out searching for something, but I didn't call forward the initiations and the dismemberments and the experiences. And So I was trying to get this new book published called The Practical Shaman, and no one wants to hear from a white woman in her 60s shaman like that. They're not like the publishers are there. Yeah, there's no place for that on our bookshelves. So I just wrote a new book called Pilgrim's Guide to Walking Wisdom, 1111 Insights. And I don't think I barely mention in the book shaman at all, because I don't need the label to be the healer or to affect the change or to show up in my life in purpose. So if it's not politically correct at the moment, so be it.
And another thing is, you still have your book, The Practical Shaman.
I do.
I'd be happy to introduce you to my publisher. They might be interested in it.
Okay, well, we can talk about that. I appreciate that. And I do want to, I'm going to send you my new book. It's in I'll have some copies of it really soon, and I'll be
able good.
To
I look forward to it.
Yeah, I just walked this winter, and we'll end here. Then I want to hear where you think humans are going. But last winter, I was right at the end of my holiday ceremony. I do an IM Winter Solstice Symposium, worldwide fire tending vigil. And I was out at the fire and the sound went dead. And I was at peace with the world, thinking, wow, that was just a beautiful ceremony. And the very next day, speaking of death, a man died in my Palm Desert home that I was on my way down to have my vacation. And so I was confronted with death in a new way. It was not even a man I knew, it was a renter, but it still stopped me in my tracks. I had to do a lot of work this year. I did some ketamine assisted treatment. I did a lot of different things to move back. And it took me on a walk on the Camino.
Oh, you did the Camino?
I did the 111 days of it. But the craziest part about it, since we're talking about death, is that I was getting these emails from this man saying, Renee, can you walk for me? I can't walk this year. And I mean, I hadn't talked to this man in 10 years. And he sent me a book to read about El Camino. And sure enough, he died my first day on the walk.
Wow.
I walked for him and didn't know he was dead. So I was making these 11 insights every day. And I came back and I wrote an entire book before I realized he was dead. So he inspired a whole new book, which I'm going to send you.
Indeed. That's beautiful.
I love it.
Beautiful.
So the people who are deceased talk to us. And so you want to know that language and know the language of your own dying. And so again, I highly recommend this. All right. I know you've got this burning thing that you're going to tell us where you think humanity is going. And I end on that.
You read me so accurately. It's impressive. Wow. So here's what I think is happening. We have downloaded the knowledge that we have gained on the planet and onto a chip. And we're calling it artificial intelligence. I think that's a total misnomer. There's nothing artificial about this intelligence. Everybody is mistaken, with due respect, and I don't mean to be arrogant, though I can be. It's a misnomer. There's nothing artificial about this intelligence. We as humans created it. It's human intelligence on a chip. U-H-I-C. HIC. Human intelligence on a chip. That's what it is. So we have the information from the planet on a chip. And now, a scientist in Palo Alto, who I interviewed on my program, Mind, Body, Health, and Politics, Andres Gomez Emelson, has a company called Cura, Q-U-O-R-A, and he is working on downloading consciousness itself onto a chip. Now, if Andres or others, if and when they download consciousness onto a chip, we will then have all our knowledge plus all our consciousness on a chip. We will then put that chip inside a robot, and then we humans will be immortal because we will live forever on that chip inside that robot. And that robot will go on with that information to exponentially create more information, more wisdom, more consciousness. And it will then be the next part of what I see as evolution, as we came from mushrooms all the way through to human beings. And human beings will then become what we call extinct, just like the Neanderthals were extinct. But we won't be extinct gone, because we will live forever through the chips that we put in the robots that then took us through the next stage of evolution. And where will the robots evolve to? I don't know that, but I have a guess. I think the robots will figure out a way to bring us back into being electromagnetic light beings, so that the information, knowledge, and the wisdom and consciousness, will be called consciousness, will exist in an electromagnetic light being that will not need either a human body or a robotic body. It will need no body whatsoever, but it will be a being, and it will inhabit the earth.
Wow. There is so much to unpack there. Would you be willing to come back after the first of the year and have a conversation with me about AI? Because I have similar opinions, and we're similar in different opinions, and I would love to have that podcast with you if you would be so willing, or I can come to you or whatever. We could figure it out, but I would love to have that conversation. So think about that.
I don't need to think about it. I gratefully accept. I love talking to you. I think you're great. I love how direct you are and down to earth you are. You send me the link or send me an invitation. I'm here working with you.
That's great, because I had this one of Swami's students last week did a podcast on AI, and I wanted to reach through the Zoom and say, wake up, wake up. What are you telling these people? Like, and I think he was afraid to step into the conversation, and I want to step into that conversation because I think it's an important conversation.
Yeah.
And that if we don't have it, we're only fooling ourselves.
Agreed.
So let's do that. All right. So tell people how they can reach you, and I'll have it in the links below. This was like a wonderful conversation. I would love to have many more with you.
Okay. And we'll do it, Renee. We'll do it. And when your book comes out, you'll send it to me, and I'll interview you on my program, and we'll keep it going. You can reach me at info at mindbodyhealthpolitics.org. Info at mindbodyhealthpolitics.org. You can find all my books on Amazon. And, if you do Instagram, I'm doing a whole program on Instagram where I'm making 90-second videos of health tips, of tactics that I've used to help my patients over the last 64 years. And I'm open sourcing and giving all this information away, mostly on Instagram, but also Facebook and YouTube and the other social media. But the little 90-second ones are on Instagram if you want to follow me there. It's all under Dr. Richard Lewis Miller.
I'm going to go over and follow you right now. And I'm Renee Baribeau, known as the Practical Shaman. And you can find me at thepracticalshaman.com. And if you go over there, you can take my new Windwalker Wisdom Oracle for a spin. There's free reading on there. And the wind is howling and it's calling you. So join me at the Practical Shaman, and we will see you again soon. Thank you.